we'll start off with exactly what is next-gen AV. That's one of those terms is kind of like cloud, right? I mean, there's a lot of different meanings out there, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and there really is no exact or definitive definition for it. But I do have a little video I would like to share with you guys. There's a gentleman that I tend to watch. He does a great job sort of stating things in a way that's very easy to understand. He is from Carbon Black, and we're currently a Carbon Black shop. Of course, I'm not supporting or promoting any particular vendor here, but that's just kind of you go to what you know. But I'm going to show a video of this gentleman who is kind of explaining exactly what is next generation AV. So let me get that going up here. Let me know if you guys have trouble hearing it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean, and welcome back to the 101. A new series where we look to define endpoint security one question at a time. As we talked about last episode, the best way to have a meaningful
Well, for whatever reason, that's not working out too good. But I'll just kind of go into explaining exactly what he was going to say. Next-gen AV is something a little bit different than the old definition-based antivirus that we've always used to know. We were a semantic shop back years and years ago. It done okay for us, but we started noticing that it was letting things slip through several times. We had some viruses get through, and luckily back then they weren't all as sophisticated as they are now. And we started looking for another solution. At that time, we were just looking for another signature-based or definition-based solution. We ended up going to AVG at that time. It was on state contract, and started rolling it out and replacing our semantic solution. We had good success with that. We didn't have a lot of false positives, and we've done a good job of capturing things. But as the threat actors got to be a little more sophisticated with their attacks and with their files, and then you got into fileless-based scripts or in memory only, or files that were known good actually performing bad things. So once we started seeing that trend happening out there in the landscape, we decided that it just wasn't good enough. The definition-based software just wasn't good enough. And that's when we decided to shift over to and start looking at a next-gen based antivirus. So what are sort of the three types of antiviruses, and how do they work? I mean, obviously what we're talking about, you've got the old traditional signature-based or definition-based model. That's where you basically have this huge database of known bad files, and the virus engine scans and says, oh, this is in my database, it's a known bad file, block it, don't let it run, and stop it. So that worked 10 years ago, right? But nowadays, as we were just saying, things are so sophisticated that doesn't work anymore. And there's a lot of flaws, 0 days, unknown files. So they had to come up with a better solution. And also the footprint on the system is rather large, because there's a huge database, and there's like 390,000 new variants added to signatures every single day. So that is growing huge. The second option is machine learning or AI based. That's where you analyze the attributes of files on the endpoint, even if it has never been seen before. And if it matches the qualities of a known bad file, it'll be blocked. And it uses advanced algorithms to do that. The attributes analyzed are things like overall byte level or file level entropy, if files are packed into one, common code reuse techniques, things like that. Machine learning can look at other people who have it installed on their systems and see what's happening there and compare it to you to see what's going on and identify. Some of the flaws in it are, what if it doesn't use a new file? What if it's an old file? So sometimes that can slip through the machine learning or AI based. And then you have the more modern, the behavioral based. This is the basis for the next gen AV. This is a lot more comprehensive. It attempts to analyze all sorts of metrics on your system instead of just being a signature. It looks at events and processes and applications and connections between those applications, connections that are north-south and also east and west. It looks for patterns on the endpoint, and then it makes a decision about whether it's to stop that or not. There used to be a great video on Carbon Black's website about how next gen AV works, and I had a kid there. His parents were kind of arguing back and forth. It was animated, and the kid, of course, if by signature base, is fine. He's a child. He's not going to do anything, right? But all of a sudden, the kid picks up a thing of lipstick and he starts walking over towards the wall, and then it's analyzing things. The behavioral based is analyzing things like, oh well, he's walking. He just picked up the lipstick. Oh well, he's walking towards the wall. His heart rate is getting elevated, and things like that. So that's a good analogy of how the behavioral based systems work. And those are the basis of the modern NGAV. And actually, even the more modern are a combination of the machine learning and AI based. Just out of curiosity of you guys out there that are using the next gen AV, what product are you guys using? Checkpoint, One, CB. CB tends to be a pretty popular one. Sentinel-1. Anybody out there using CrowdStrike or have heard of CrowdStrike? I know that's a very popular one out there in the market today. There are a lot now, as most things, when something hits the market, the market tends to get flooded. Everybody tends to jump on board. You got Cisco AMP, you have Palo Alto Traps, you got CB Defense, you got Falcon Strike by CrowdStrike. Sentinel-1 is a big one. I know as I serve on the strike team for NCLGISA, I've responded to many events in this past year. Unfortunately, most of them cyber related, and almost all of those were ransomware related. So we've got to see a good slice of what's going on out there, and what some of the other vendors are, some of the other counties and municipalities are using as vendors for their their next gen AV. And what we have found is in a lot of those cases, the next gen AV does help. It's not perfect. It has things you've got to take care of, which we'll get into just a little bit later. But they do tend to mitigate or stop a lot of the threats these days that are getting through the traditional definition-based antivirus. We actually run both here in Stanley County. We still run our AVG along beside of our Carbon Black Defense. Anyone else doing that? Running both the old definition-based and the new next-gen AV? Okay, somebody said Sophos and CB at the same time. For those of you out there using CB Defense, how long have you been using it? More than a year? A couple of years? Got some using Trend and CB. We've been on CB Defense ever since it was actually Carbon Black. We actually even before that, Bit9, and then it went to Carbon Black, and then Carbon Black acquired them, and then they molded it into the CB Defense product, and then of course VMware came along and gobbled them up. So they're making a lot of pretty cool changes to it. And I know there's a lot of things on their roadmap, and it's easy to get lost in all the functionality that's going on in that space in the market. So if you are looking or kicking tires on going to a next gen AV solution, which I highly recommend that you do, um, make sure, just like all other things, make sure you do your homework. They're both, or they're all trying to accomplish the same mission, but they're all very, very different, especially in the way that you implement them. For you CB defense folks out there, how many of you thought it was pretty difficult to set up? And you guys can talk too, not just chat. So what about, so when you, the CB defensors, the ones, if you're setting up the rules and all that, did you find it challenging to sort of get in there and figure out what rules you should or need to write? I know for us, we had a pretty good project manager at the onset of the project, which is something else you definitely need regardless of what solution you go to. Make sure you look at it heavily upfront before you purchase it, and make sure you're comfortable with the back end of it and setting that up. Because it is a pretty high learning curve, as someone just said in the chat, on CB defense, because you've got a lot of rules you got to go in there and write. There are things that are applications that you wouldn't think would be applications, like every DOCX, every XLSX, every file is considered an application. So setting all of that up can be quite daunting. So things like CrowdStrike, they don't have those very granular rules that you have to add into the system. It makes it a little bit easier, but I think you lose a little bit of less power. But it's all what kind of fits your situation and what you're comfortable with. So just make sure you pay attention to that when looking at a next gen AV solution, and get that good project management up front. A lot of times I just want to give you a couple of hours, give you like a kickoff, and don't want to hold your hand or give you white glove service through the whole thing. Make sure you do that part of it. When we went with CB Defense, it took us quite a while to sort of get comfortable with the rules. And we got ours locked down pretty good. Most users can't hardly do anything without us going into bypass mode on the systems, which adds some work on this end. So realize that from a help desk perspective, you're going to get quite a few more calls coming in your help desk because things are being blocked. And every time a software update rolls out, you're going to have to go in and start whitelisting or blacklisting files. Every time you get a new software application, it's probably going to break it or not allow it to run at first until you get in and whitelist the file. So it's definitely some work on the IT department, and especially the help desk, getting that set up. But it also gives you some assurance that, hey, this thing's working. You know, it's not really letting anything come through here that is malicious. I can only speak to CB Defense. I did do a trial for CrowdStrike when we looked at it. We also looked at Palo Alto Traps, which we were really impressed with. And going back to my strike team, for the events that we responded to, the ones that didn't have next gen AV, that's one of the very, very first things when they brought the systems back online, was to install a next gen antivirus solution on each endpoint, especially if they did the scorched earth method. Or even if they didn't, a lot of times if it was a smaller event, they would make sure, and the insurance companies would recommend it and almost force you into doing it, putting an endpoint solution or ED or EPP solution on each endpoint to detect, especially when you're doing your recovery phase in any type of incident. And that's the other part of it, is if you do have an incident, one of the great things about next gen AV is most of them are coupled with an EDR solution, an endpoint recovery, detection and response, excuse me. And what that does is allow the threat hunters to come in, the National Guard and whoever, the FBI, whoever's doing the threat hunting part of it, to get good insight into what happened on that machine. I know CrowdStrike is really, really good at it for the little bit that I've seen of it. And CB Defense, they have another CB Insight. I don't have that product. They do have a little bit of the kill chain and built in the software, so you can see exactly which files launched what, and all of the processes that it spawned, the exact command line that it ran, all the arguments for that command line. And that's really, really important stuff if you ever have an event and the threat hunters can come in and they can really tell what is going on. That gives them a lot of insight and to be able to track down who patient zero was and what the vector of attack was and where did it spread. And then being able to search through that in your EDR, you can also find what other workstations has potentially landed on or is potentially trying to execute this particular code. And they also, most of them talk out to the mothership, to the cloud, if you will, to compare files being executed. And most of them you can do cloud scan prior to execute, which slows down execution a little bit for your endpoints or your users. But in some cases, it may be worth it. We have some policies that have that enabled and some not. So that Next-Gen AV is just doing a lot more than what your traditional virus, definition-based virus is doing. I'm going to attempt to show this video over here. Most of you probably already know what most of the malware variants are, but they have changed some over the years. So let me try this again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean, and we're back with another episode of the 101. So far, we've talked about NGAV, and we've compared it to different types of antivirus in terms of how it stops malware and non-malware attacks. And we even took time to define non-malware. But what about malware? It's a big topic, I know. But if this series is designed to do anything, it's to get to the core concepts of endpoint security. And so that's what we're going to do. To start what will naturally become an ongoing discussion about malware, let's first try to figure out what exactly it is. And to do that, we need to ask the question, what are the different types of malware? Okay, so here's the challenge with talking about malware. It's about as broad a topic as it gets when it comes to endpoint security. It's an umbrella term to describe any kind of software that's intended to do harm. Malicious software. Malware. You see what we did there? To ask the question, what is malware, or how do I stop malware, it's just too broad a question, and it doesn't yield actionable answers. In order to start this discussion off correctly, we need to go a level deeper and really dig into the different types of malware, what they are, and how they differ. Okay, let's answer the question first and then dive into the specifics. Though many variants exist, there are 8 major types of malware, categorized primarily by what they do and how. They are viruses, worms, trojans, adware, spyware, rootkits, botnets, and ransomware. Okay, let's start at the top of the list and get a quick definition for each type. So viruses cause damage, and they do that by either slowing down or completely crashing applications, data, or entire systems. They're designed to self-propagate by latching onto a good application, becoming part of it, and riding its executable to initiate its goals. Worms are also designed to self-propagate, but they don't need another program to run. That's why worms tend to target system vulnerabilities to automatically infect and then spread. They don't need to wait for an unsuspecting victim to click a link or start a process. Trojans, like in the Epic from which they take their name, hide malicious code in the package of a seemingly good application, which typically results in remote access for an attacker to use in the future. Trojans use this approach to gain trust, so that the end user willingly runs the program in order to evade traditional defenses. Adware is annoying. Its sole purpose is to serve up ads without the user's consent in order to make money. After infection, adware is really good at resisting your attempts to remove it, often digging deep and entangling itself within the registry or master boot records. Spyware monitors your activities. It records keystrokes, web activity, message logs. Sometimes it even grabs access to your webcam. Its primary attribute is stealth. It's designed to evade any attempt to detect it and to pass whatever it uncovers in a stealthy, secure manner. Rootkits are designed to dig deep in order to gain administrative access, either by attacking known vulnerabilities that enable privilege escalation or by tricking an unsuspecting victim into giving it up. In either case, rootkits, when successful, tend to phone home in order to create a backdoor for an attacker or an automated attack to continue. Botnets are also designed to root into endpoints so they can be controlled remotely. But their goal isn't to steal data from an endpoint. Instead, they turn endpoints into zombies, unwilling participants in larger attacks that tend to target other machines by remote attackers. And finally, ransomware, the scourge of 2017. But really, it's been around for decades. Ransomware is designed to encrypt valuable data on your endpoint and, well, hold it ransom. It gives you the decryption keys only after you've paid a certain sum of money. Okay, so what do we take away from our discussion today? Malware is a broad term, yet we talk about it and how to stop it as if it was a singular thing. This way of thinking can confuse and distract, especially when talking about how to prevent infections in the first place. On the other hand, characterizing malware by what it does and how it does it, even generally speaking, puts us in a much better position to assess what we may be susceptible to, based off of who we are and what kind of assets we have. And when we talk about malware this way, it shows us why a new approach is sorely needed. If we can develop defenses that target malware's techniques, rather than scrambling to constantly update our blacklist, we'll be much more effective at stopping malware in its tracks. But more on that next week. And that's our time for today. Join us next week as we continue our discussion about malware.
So I realize that's probably an elementary review for most of you. I've probably heard those terms for years ago, and they haven't changed a whole lot. But I think it's important to, because terminology matters, especially in our industry, right? And especially if you get into a case where you got a lot of teams coming together, for example, after an incident, or you have a breach, or you have a ransomware attack, because you're going to have a lot of teams come in. You're going to have folks like the National Guard, the FBI, you'll have the strike team coming in, you're going to have your own upper executive management, you're going to have emergency management coming in. So there's going to be a lot of teams coming in. So terminology matters. And the last one there, of course, ransomware, that is the absolute primary one that we have seen as a strike team in the past 2 years. Since 2013 in North Carolina, there's been 172, I believe, ransomware attacks on either local governments or school systems. And a lot of those have been successful. And that's very scary. Having a solution like NextGenAV is definitely something that if you don't have it, you need to look at. If you do have it, constantly be looking how to improve it, and better your rules, better your security posture, because it is only one facet, right? I mean, there's nothing we can just turn on that's a silver bullet. It takes a lot of layers to secure anything, but this is one of the important ones that we have found. Now, we have been to some places. I know a place that was successfully attacked with ransomware that had carbon black defense. And they had some decent rules set up from the beginning, but they had also allowed administrators to disable the endpoint protection, or put the endpoint in bypass, essentially. And the threat actors, once they got in, they were being blocked. CB Defense, they could see it in the logs, it was being blocked. The software that they were trying to run, the executable they were trying to run, was successfully being blocked. However, once they got over to a machine and escalated their privileges, they were able to turn CB Defense off. And once, of course, they did that, they were able to get the keys to the kingdom, and it spread from there. And in that particular location, it was pretty bad. They got to their backup system and got their backups, which is what we have seen in almost all of these. Their first target to come in is to take out your backup system. And then start encrypting stuff. And then the most recent flavor is, after the encryption, is exfil as much data as they possibly can, so that if you don't pay the ransom for the decryptor key, they're going to just sit back and say, well, okay, but we're going to release all this personally identifiable information if you don't pay us the ransom now. So it's twofold. Um, and it's really puts agencies and organizations in a really bad spot. Um, and it's definitely something you need to prepare for and talk about, because as I say, the next gen antivirus is just one layer of a many layered system that you need to have in place to protect your agency. But also making sure you have good DR plans, make sure your backup systems are behind firewalls. They don't share passwords, they don't share the same subnet as your systems that you're backing up, network segmentation, things like that. Not only at your edge, but internally in your network. Hardening systems with CIS controls and things like that, or STIG controls. Make sure you have a good vulnerability management program. We use Nessus here. And we are also looking at, and something else that comes with a lot of the next gen AV. Now, this does not apply to CB Defense, but a host-based firewall. And that allows you to do microsegmentation. If you turn on a firewall on every single endpoint, then if a threat actor ever does get in, he's essentially in the dark because he can't scan the network and discover anything, which makes it very difficult for them coming in. And we have found that as well, making sure you have a good SIEMs system. We use Splunk for ours, a cloud-based Splunk. We don't have a very high ingestion rate, so we can't get a lot. We get our domain controllers and our firewalls. I would love to be able to get all of our endpoints, but making sure you have a well-layered approach to your security is absolutely key. And it just has been reinforced every single time that we respond to an event. The ones that have done the layered approach, they've come out well. Yeah, it was a very tough period, and they went through a tough time, and it was hard to get back up, but it really paid dividends having that layered approach. But at the end of the day, you can't plug every hole and you can't do everything exactly right. But I'd love to get some thoughts here from some of you guys, especially the ones that are running the next gen AV. And the Sentinel-1 ones, there's a lot of functionality in there. So I'd love to hear from some of you guys what your experience has been with that. Do you like the platform? Does it seem to be working for you? Was it difficult to set up? Has your vendor been supportive? Things like that. So chime in here and give us some thoughts. I know Samuel said you have Sentinel-1, Gene Twiggins. If they're still with us, Sentinel-1. Sentinel-1, from what I have seen, I haven't seen it in action. I don't have a trial of it or haven't ever tried it or anything. I know some of the places that we responded to, they went with Sentinel-1, and it seems to be a very comprehensive solution. It has not only the next gen AV, but it has the EDR baked in. It has the host-based firewall baked in. It has the host-based intrusion detection built in. It has a lot of functionality, and it's one of the more popular ones on the market today. Something else, yeah, somebody mentioned which product you choose, Barracuda Firewall, Web Security, or versus Cisco Umbrella. I've never used Cisco Umbrella. Excuse me, I've never used Barracuda Firewall. We are a Sonic Wall shop here. We do have Umbrella. I really, really like Umbrella. We moved away from the iPrism appliances to Umbrella. Of course, it's all cloud-based. It's pretty easy to set up. Setting up the virtual appliances was a little bit of a bear, and hooking everything into AD, but once it's all set up, it runs well. The only negative that we have found with Umbrella is if you do a run as on an endpoint to install an application, or if you log off and log in as an admin to install something for the user, it registers that username for until that user does something to log back into the network, whether it's access a share or log out, log back in. So sometimes we have users call us that are allowed to, like Facebook, for example, we have them in a specific group in AD that allows them to get out to Facebook. Well, if we log in and install something, or our PDQ inventory scans it with a credentialed scan, it wants to register an umbrella as that credentialed user, which doesn't allow the logged in user to access Facebook or whatever until they log out and log back in. So that's something that's been interesting that we didn't realize when we went with umbrella, but otherwise, I really like it. Trying to catch another question here. It's being changed now. That not as has VMware changed the entire nomenclature of Carbon Black. I've been looking into it, but don't see the reference to CB Defense. They have changed a lot of the titles. To my knowledge, CB Defense is still there, but they do have several in their whole endpoint detection or whole endpoint protection repertoire. They have renamed a lot of things, and they've changed their website quite a bit. And I do not like their new website. It's not navigation friendly at all. And Carbon Black had a much better website. Now, their support for Carbon Black, at least from what I've experienced, has been okay. We've had several times where rules or a file will get blocked one time and on one computer and not blocked on another, and their explanation for why it happened wasn't too great. If it can't access the cloud service, the reputation comes back as unknown or not listed, and then all of a sudden, so there's been a little bit of back and forth with them there. So I've gotten I'm a little bit disappointed in their support, but these days, who's not disappointed in almost any vendor's support? I think that was the last guy. And going back to the threat hunting part, that is so critical. If you ever have an incident, show of hands, has anybody had an incident in the past couple of years or an attack? Okay, that's great. No hands. Let's hope it can stay that way. Because when you do, you're probably and should, you're going to have to shut down all your systems and allow the forensic investigation to take place until you can bring those systems back online safely. And in order for that forensics phase to go smoothly and as quickly as possible, you're going to need a lot of information to provide and to feed into those forensic investigators. The National Guard has got a lot of tools, and when they walk in that door, they're going to want all kinds of information. They're going to want event logs. They're going to want SIEMs logs. They're going to want firewall logs, intrusion. They're going to want all this information that they can look through and plow through to try to figure out exactly what happened. When did it happen? Because knowing when it happened and the scope of the attack is vastly important to know when to roll back to. You need to know, was it a week ago? Was it 2 weeks ago? Was it 90 days ago? And your backups don't go that far. So that really impacts the decision moving forward. And as much information as you can give to those forensic investigators, the quicker that process will go and you can make that decision, because you're kind of sitting there, even if you don't have a severe event or a large scoped event, you've got to take the time to let that forensic phase go through. So you're kind of sitting there and your users are really getting anxious and wanting to get back on the system, and you can't do it until you determine the scope and the vector and the patient zero and exactly what happened in that event. So it's critically important. I've learned a tremendous amount in the past year or so, or a couple of years, responding to these events. It's been very, very eye-opening, and it's kind of scary, actually. My guys don't like me too much because every time I go to one, I come back and I start changing things and pushing buttons and breaking stuff, and it starts affecting everybody. But it's just what you got to do. Okay, Kyle Baker said we had a major one. So he knows what it feels like, and it is a horrible, horrible place to be. So anything you can do on the prevention end to do it is absolutely necessary. how many of you are trying to implement any kind of security framework like CIS controls or STIGs or NIST? Any of you out there? You guys are a quiet group today. That's something we've really been working on for hardening our systems. And it's really, really critical. I don't know if, because David Moore is saying that, I guess that his hand is saying that he is attempting to do the CIS control. Or David, if you don't mind, if you are saying that, which framework are you implementing? It may be on. We started out doing the STIG, which is a National Guard thing. Then we ended up shifting over to CIS controls. And basically, it's just the hardening of your Windows-based systems. A lot of group policy settings, and also in your firewalls and things like that. But it's really, really critical, and all those things complement your antivirus solution. So definitely take a look at that if you're not currently doing it. Like I said, network segmentation is really, really key, and how to stop the traffic or monitor the traffic in between those segments, things like that. Nessus, a appliance. Tenable IO is probably better, but it's probably cost prohibitive for many of our folks. But Nessus is only like $2,400 a year. It's an appliance that you can pop on any hypervisor, and it will scan your network and let you know where all your vulnerabilities are. And it's actually really, really simple to set up. Very, very key. Gives you a lot of good information, tells you exactly what you need to do. We found it to be very, very key in finding some vulnerabilities. And it's hard to stay on top of them. They change so often. It's hard to stay on top of all the vulnerabilities, and especially in a small shop like we are. Speaking of which, how many of you have CISOs in your shop? Most of us probably don't. I know we don't. Our county is only like a population of 60,000. We have about 575 to 600 full-time employees, and we've got 4 IT staff, counting me. So we're very, very stretched, as I'm sure all of you guys are. Somebody said they do have a virtual CISO. Yeah, that is something we're going to look at possibly, because we need somebody focused on security all the time. That's just how much the landscape and threatscape has changed. And as a CIO for the past 2 years, that's almost all I have done is be a CISO, and it's hard to bounce back and forth between roles and get it all done. So that's something we're definitely going to be looking at moving forward if budget allows, which is, as you know, all know, a very difficult task.
Chad, can you hear me? This is Brad at Pitt County.
I can.
Okay, something happened to my audio there for a moment. So I was the one who said that we have a virtual CISO. We have a managed security service that we signed on to maybe about 1.5 years, 2 years ago now. And one of the provided services is a virtual CISO. So they don't get extremely in depth, but we can go and ask generic top level questions, and then have some professional services underneath that if we need to. But they've been very helpful in leading the way for us. And it was a cheaper way than hiring someone internally for a position like that, because the funding that you'd have a proper CISO in-house is ridiculous compared to having some type of managed service like that.
You're absolutely right. And that is a great point for the smaller shops that can afford, and we're probably going to end up being one of those. I'm sure when I request that from my manager, he's going to say the same thing. But there are some options out there for virtual CISOs, and there are services like Arctic Wolf, for example, that will be your SIEMs that will collect all of that data, analyze it. There'll be a security operations center for you. They'll call you or notify you, or if you allow them to remote in, they'll squash a bug if need be, if you sign those papers up front to do that. And they have something like a virtual CISO service. That's definitely something you can check into to get a managed service provider to provide those services. But I just cannot recommend enough, given what I have seen in the past 2 years and what I've responded to, having a service like that and doing all of the things that we're talking about. I mean, if you can't get a CISO, having a service like that, but also doing all of the things that we've talked about here, because yeah, I mean, this is a conversation about next gen AV, which is vastly important, but that is, one facet to a very, very multifaceted approach to layered security, and doing all of those things is so important, and keeping up with those vulnerabilities. I don't know if you guys seen it, the vulnerability to come across for domain controllers just a little while back. That's a huge one, and it's being exploited in the wild right now. And a lot of times those things are hard to read. You got to go down. You think that a Windows update is going to get you fixed, and it will come February, but you got to get down in the weeds and some of those notices and figure out, oh, wait a minute, there's a registry setting I've got to apply here in addition to installing this patch that Microsoft recommends. It's very difficult to keep up with it all, but it's just got to do everything you can do. And at the end of the day, it's, you can't get to risk of zero. But I appreciate you sharing that information, Brad, because that is a good point. Anybody else have any? I'm sorry, go ahead.
One disclaimer to that is I'm not as highly involved in that. I know a little bit about the information, and I mean, I could have misspoke about one or two opportunities there, but at the same time, I feel pretty confident that the reason why we externalize that service is that, I mean, we look for opportunities like that from here and there, whether or not it's this topic or other topics, and that just seemed to be one that makes sense. I mean, like I said, the cost of hiring a true CISO on staff, I mean, it's something that most governments probably can't afford.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. To get a true CISO with that level of skill and talent is going to take a lot of money.
And luckily here we do have an infrastructure manager that's our director that's highly involved in that, and he's got a lot of knowledge and has done a lot of things to help us out. But I think he'll even acknowledge the fact that having that additional help is very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, because you just need somebody that's keeping up with it. That's staying in tune to what's going on out there and what the current trends are, what the current threatscape is, what the current tools are, what you need. For example, like, I didn't know that the forensics phase was so important and the tools to feed into that forensics phase until I started responding with these events with the strike team. How important that was. Having visibility into your north-south traffic at the firewall. That's something we're working on here. We've got basic logs now, but we need something better. Like FortiGate Analyzer, I know was one for FortiGate appliances or Fortinet appliances. That gives you a tremendous visibility into that north-south traffic at your firewall, and all of that information, turning on PowerShell logging in Windows, which is part of the CIS, NIST or STIG controls, so that the forensics can see exactly what command was run every time a PowerShell is run. And in a lot of these next gen AV solutions that we're talking about, they have that kill chain and those command lines. So that information is just vastly important to putting that puzzle together with all the pieces that you could possibly do and develop a picture of what happened. Because I'm telling you, it is a nightmare of chaos when these things happen, and being down for that amount of time. And a lot of places, they don't get their data back, or they roll back to 3 months prior to. And, you can imagine what that's like on a tax system or a finance system or something like that, having to restore back to 3 months ago, or however far back you got to go, or maybe you don't go at all. Maybe they've got your backups, and we've seen it. They've got your backup so compromised, and you didn't have far enough back, or whatever, and you can't restore. So you're at a very bad place at that point, and that's why I think a lot of people end up paying the ransom, which we highly advise against. But it still happens, and I do agree with it being a local business decision. But every event I've ever been to, the FBI, the strike team, the National Guard, all the agencies involved recommend against paying the ransom. but a lot of times it's paid. As a matter of fact, we had a conversation at one event with the insurance vendor. The lady handling the claim had been on the job for 4 years, and prior to that had no cybersecurity experience whatsoever. But for her particular insurance company, I won't mention any names here or any companies here, but she had said, and almost in a touting slash bragging way, that in the past year, she had handled, their company had handled 1,300 ransomware cases, and they paid the ransom in 95% of them. So it's a huge problem, and we're addressing it as a strike team. We're trying to run that up the chain to legislatures and elected members and some of the higher ups that we can leverage to try to put some pressure on the industry to say we got to stop. We're feeding the beast here. It's got to stop. So we're working angles there and all of that, and we're trying, but it's a slow moving train. David Morris, I have a question for your thoughts on Microsoft Labs. Yes, Labs. We almost implemented Labs. For those of you who don't know what Labs is, local administrator password solution. And what it does is essentially change the local administrator password on all of your endpoints to a unique password and stores that unique password in Active Directory. And that prevents what's called pass the hash attack, so that a lot of agencies, and we were this way for a while, make the local administrator password the same on all the workstations. Well, if a hacker gets into one, that allows them to skip and hop across the network because that password is the same on all the stations, or take that hash and pass it around the network if they can't actually get the credentials. What Labs does is make every single administrator password the same. It's a good solution. It's pretty easy to implement. We didn't, because we've seen in many cases, and this is a businesses as well, that you'll have to make. We ultimately ended up not doing it because most of the time your AD is going to be compromised and you're going to be down and you're not going to be able to get into it during an incident. So not always, or if you can VLAN it off, you can get into your compromised or dirty domain controller and you can get access to those passwords, possibly, but sometimes you can't. So what we've ended up doing is through group policy, doing a user rights management and saying, deny access this computer from the network to any built-in administrator account. That's one thing we've done. But I've also created a single domain account that gets pushed out to all the workstations into the administrator group. And we've got a PowerShell script that changes that password on a rotation, on a scheduled rotation, and emails it out to us, or emails a portion out to us. We know we put a prefix on it and we just know that part. That way, if somebody did happen to get the email, they could get the whole password. So that is something we just recently started doing. And I haven't got the script. I've got the script wrote. I don't have it implemented yet. But I think that's the route we're going to take on that. I'm not knocking Labs. I think Labs is a good solution if that's the one you want to use. I know a colleague of mine, he actually just creates them in LastPass and stores everything in LastPass, which I think is a good idea as well. Because then if you're compromised, you can't get to your domain controllers, you just go out to LastPass, which is a cloud-based solution, and you've got access to your local admin passwords. So just some thoughts there around Labs. Yeah, AJ Milton, I agree. Yeah, just like everything we're talking about here, Labs, NextGenAV, CIS controls, they are all part of a solution, and definitely not the whole solution. But great question about Labs. That's something that's been talked about quite a bit amongst the strike team, and something you need to take a look at is how to manage those local administrator passwords. Something else to do is, for any privileged account, take advantage of the protected users group, which if you put a user in there and whenever they log into any workstation, it does not cache their credentials. It will not create the hash and store it locally on that machine. So that way, if there ever is an attack, but you gotta be selective with that, because because of that, you can't log into it offline. So the machine would have to be online. Obviously, you have to have a connection to the domain controller for you to be able to log in. So definitely some good thoughts there. But the fact that you're asking about laps and thinking about using it means you're on the right path to that part of securing your network, that particular layer of securing your network. It's a great question there. So any more questions? We're definitely coming up on the 3:15 mark. I could talk all day. I've, like I said, been very fortunate to experience a lot in my NCLGISA strike team role in a lot of these places and learned a lot. If you don't have cyber insurance, definitely think about getting it. We have two. Excuse me. We've got, excuse me. We've got the NACC version through the county commissioners, and we also have travelers. But what we have found is that a lot of cases, as I was saying with insurance companies, they want to come in and pressure you to pay the ransom, and they want to force you to use their vendors for things like forensics and remediation, restoration. And we have found that a lot of times they are not your best friends. So definitely have it, but make sure you understand it, understand the coverage, and what it's going to be like to deal with them. That went down the wrong way. Well, hey, great guys. I really appreciate the opportunity today to share some of the next gen AV stuff with you. Any more questions or comments?
Thanks for hosting the talk, Chad.
Oh, absolutely. Hopefully you got something out of it. Well, you guys have a great and wonderful time at the rest of the NCLGISA event.